今日はいっぱい本持ってきましたよ。でもそう考えるとあんまりいらないですね。なんでですか？この動画はあんまりお金持ってない方か、日本語の勉強であんまりお金使いたくない方のためです。つまり JLPT レベルは関係なくて、お金使わずにどうやって日本語の能力を高めることについての動画です。では始めましょうか。So if you follow me for a longer time, I made a similar video in 2024 with the same introduction. But this time, this video will be a bit different, as the introduction was also in Japanese. This time I want to make a video on how to learn Japanese, and you watch many videos about it, but how to learn Japanese if you don't want to spend money or don't have money. Because I myself believe that everyone should have access to learn what they want to learn. So regardless of your income, regardless of your financial situation, this video is for everyone that wants to learn Japanese. And I personally learned Japanese at university with instructors. I paid money to learn Japanese. But this time I took some time to research about free resources to learn kanji, vocabulary, grammar, and I sorted them from JLPT levels, so from N5 to N4 to N3, N2 and N1. So basically I sorted every resource you need to get fluent in Japanese language. At the end I will also give you like a small conclusion about how to learn with free resources, the disadvantages and advantages, and finally, I will give you some other information that may be useful for someone wanting to learn Japanese, regardless of their level. So let's get right into it. And where do we start? N5. So usually if you look in the internet, some people will say they learned JLPT N5 in 1 month. Some people will say they took 1 year or half a year to learn JLPT N5. But for this video, instead of giving you a time frame, I kind of sorted every JLPT level by hours. So for the JLPT N5 level, usually you need 150 to 300 study hours. Of course, in this video we talk about self-study, so how you personally can learn with free resources without having a teacher or an instructor. So you can expect that learning will more likely take 300 hours instead of 150 hours. So this video is also structured the way that I will tell you how many kanji, vocabulary and grammar you have to learn. Because we're at level N5, let's start with hiragana and katakana first. If you don't know what hiragana and katakana are, they are the alphabet of Japanese language. And you have hiragana, katakana and kanji. Those are the 3 alphabets that are used. And some people would also say there's a 4th alphabet. It's called the romanji. And the romanji are the romanization of the Japanese alphabet. So in other words, kind of made for foreigners to make it easier to understand. So you will start with hiragana and katakana. If I remember it correctly, there are about 46 hiragana and the according katakana. So for example, you have the vowels a, I, U, E, O, and you have them in katakana and in hiragana. And usually the different hiragana and katakana that will follow are mixes between consonants and vowels. So you mix the K with an A and you get ka. You mix an S with an A and you get sa. And you do it for all the vowels and a list of certain consonants, and there you got your writing systems. From what I had at university, it took me about 2 weeks to learn it. And what I read in the internet and what I researched is that usually it should take you about 2 weeks. So 1 week for hiragana and 1 week for katakana. In general, to really master them and not forget about them, you need some more practice, but to generally learn it, it will take 2 weeks. And to learn hiragana and katakana, really you can just type in the internet hiragana sheet, katakana sheet. I think there's also a course from Japanese 101 about 2 hours that will go through every hiragana and katakana. There are endless resources in the internet, and because it's a really basic level of Japanese, there's not that much room to make mistakes in the explanation, so just pick what you like. And now we come to the kanji. Basically the kanji are symbols that have a meaning in themselves. So for example, in the alphabet language, if you have a word like language, it consists of L, A, N, G, U, A, G, E, and so on. If you translate language into Japanese, it will get gengo. and it is a mix between two kanji. The first one is used in words like imas, to say, and the other one is go, for example like Deutsche-go, the German language, or Igirisu-go, the English language. So saying and language will be language, and that is basically how kanji work. So you learn a symbol with a meaning, and sometimes they get combined, and if they get combined you can call them vocabulary or kanji. Usually they're vocabulary, and that is the third writing system. At the beginning you need to learn about 100 kanji, and there's a website that is called JLPTsensei.com. Basically they have a database of different JLPT levels, so the kanji, the vocabulary and the grammar. For the beginning I would recommend you to visit that website and look at the kanji list there. There's also a Google spreadsheet document that I found by, I think they're called Coco Academy, where they also sorted vocabulary and grammar by every JLPT level. So for N5 I would just recommend you to start with these two documents and mix both documents together and kind of get a gist of how many kanji you need to learn. If you want a more in-depth video how you should study, how you actually should study, just write it down in the comments. In this video I just want to give you the resources for yourself to study. And because we talked about kanji and vocabulary, we need to talk about grammar too. And for grammar I would also recommend you JLPT Sensei again. Basically for grammar they give you the translation in English and then there are some example sentences. Just the explanations about grammars are not that much in depth, but I think for the N5 or the N4 level, the grammar is not that complicated yet, so it is okay if you just read the examples and kind of get fun to the grammar. So now we come to the N4 level, and the N4 level takes about 300 to 450 hours. Also now you should be able to use and read about 300 kanji, and your vocabulary that you know should be around about 1500 words. For the grammar, you should be able to use and read 100 grammar. The resources I told you in the N5 part before, you can use them too for N4. I also found another site that is called studykanji.net. You can use it basically to see all the different kanji for every level, the basic ones, and they also have a quiz function where you can kind of get quizzes to learn the kanjis. In general, I would recommend you to input everything that you learned into a spaced repetition system. If you don't know what it is basically a flashcard system. So on the front you have, for example, the translation of the kanji, and on the back you have the kanji itself. And basically you look at the flashcard and just turn it around and see if it's correct. And you do it in repeatedly time frames, and this will help you to make the information stick better. I will give you some more information on which applications you can use there at the later part of the video too. For now, let's focus on grammar and vocabulary too. For vocabulary, I found a website, it's called kanshudo.com. It has a kind of collection of every vocabulary you need to learn. You can take this website and cross-read it with the other websites I gave you before. For grammar, I would also still stick to JLPT Sensei and maybe try to find some examples in the internet. For example, if you don't understand a certain grammar, you can just type in this grammar and then explanation, for example. For example, in the beginning of learning Japanese, if I didn't understand some grammar points, I used to go to Hi Native. It is like kind of a website where people can ask questions and then they get some answers, sometimes from natives, sometimes from other Japanese learners. You can just Google in the internet in general. That is a good tip I have for you, because usually free resources, they're not double checked that much, because the persons that do free resources are usually Japanese learners themselves and not always certified Japanese teachers. So in this case, I would recommend you to cross-read everything. If you learn the grammar, in this case I told you JLPTsensei.com is pretty useful, you can take that information and then look for different examples in the internet. And when you look them up, you can see, it is used in these and these ways, and they say this and they say this, those two information connects. So usually you would use the grammar in this way. So try to take some resources, some other resources too. That's why I give you different resources for the same grammar, for example. So now we come to N3. It is kind of a time commitment between 450 and 650 hours. And you should be able to read around about 650 kanji. Also, your vocabulary proficiency should be at 3000 vocabulary at that time, and grammar is about 200 grammar points that you have to learn. If you wonder why I can give you just general numbers, you have to know the JLPT test that I mentioned in the beginning is the Japanese language proficiency test. It is like the TOEFL for English, for example, or the Cambridge certificate you can do. So basically, if you learn Japanese and you want to have a, let's say, certificate of how good your Japanese is, the JLPT is the most renowned test you can take. And the thing is that the JLPT test, I think until 2010, they gave lists on what you need to learn for which level, but now there are actually no official lists. So every list that I recommend to you is just a general list that was made by some person that had some assumptions on which level should have which knowledge. So if you have a JLPT test, you don't know which vocabulary exactly will come, you just have a general, let's say, a general guideline of how much you need to know. Of course, if you know more, it is more easier to pass the test. And if you know less, you can expect to not pass the test, for example. So keep in mind that you don't need to learn this, and that vocabulary. You just need to have a general proficiency. So in this case, like I said, it is good to always have many resources to get a general understanding. For kanji, I have a good list for you too again. There's a list on Wikipedia for the Joyo kanji. And Joyo consists of two kanji again. And Jo means general and Yo means usage or use. So the general used kanji. And the good thing about this list is that it is a list around about 2200 kanji. And this list is published by the Japanese government. So you have to imagine when Japanese people go to school, the teachers get a list of kanji that they should teach the students there. And those kanjis are usually kanjis that are used in everyday life. And if you know those kanjis, you can consider yourself to be fluent enough to read the most things, to read the most... So my light for the camera just gave up. But anyway, where were we? So the Joyo kanji is the general list of kanji that are published by the Japanese government. And usually when you're at N1 level, not every N1 kanji or N1 level kanji is the same as the Joyo kanji, but if you have the goal to be fluent or to read the most text, be able to read the most books, be able to read the most general information, and in general, if you want a guideline on which kanji are the most important to learn, you can use this Joyo kanji list too. And the good thing with this is it is not just published by someone, it is the Japanese government. So in this case, you know it is a kind of trustworthy resource. And another good thing I found is that I told you when you learn grammar, I gave you some resources. You can use them for N3 too. But the problem is that sometimes you lack the information. So you don't have enough example sentences to really understand it. If you have a, let's say, study book, you will have a much more in-depth explanation which you don't have when you just use internet resources. So there's a site called tofugu.com. I will link it down in my spreadsheet too, where you can have more example sentences to Japanese grammar. As I read, it is also made by natives, so this is a kind of good thing too, I think. And there you can get more examples for your grammar. Also, every information that I tell you in this video will be included in a general spreadsheet. And if you want to download it, you can just take a look down in the description. I think I will just put it as the first link, and there you can download it by signing up the form at my website, and then I will send it to you with an email. So now we come to the N2 level, and actually the N2 level is a pretty important level, because I think this is the interesting or best level you can reach in some kind of ways. So the time commitment here is about 650 hours to 1000 hours. Here I can give you a more general guideline. Because I didn't take the JLPT N5, N4 or N3 tests, I just knew that my level, because I studied at university, was between N3 and N2 after 2 years. But I studied 3 years of Japanese every day. And it took me around about 2 to 3 years to reach the N2 level. And now I'm round about between the N2 and the N1 level. So if you really study every day, and if you really study effectively, because I sometimes didn't study that effectively, I think in around about 2 to 3 years you can reach the N2. And there you should be able to read about 1000 kanji and about 6000 vocabulary and about additional 300 grammar patterns. I just remember, because it is not that far away, that you need to learn at least 200 grammar points for the N2. But I used a different, let's say, grammar book, so it is not always obvious how much grammar points were learned before, how much grammar points you already know, but in this case you can say around about 200 to 300 grammars. And basically what I said in the beginning, why the N2 is such an important level, is this is the level where you can kind of consider yourself to be kind of fluent. So by having N2, you can do most conversations. Maybe you don't understand everything, but if you don't understand something, you already know how to talk with the people to find that information, or how to talk to a person so they put it in different words and you can understand them. And also when you have an N2, you're also applicable to work for a Japanese company, for example. Usually they want to have N1, but for many companies N2 is already enough. I also heard that for some companies, if you have the certain background, for example in business or marketing and so on, N3 is also enough. And also I think a really certain point is between N3 and N2. Because you start to understand much about the Japanese language, you can start to consume many resources. I think from N3 on you can start to watch some slice of life or some easier anime, for example. You can also try to watch some Netflix series in Japanese, for example. And a really crucial step starts from around N2 level, and it is to really immerse yourself in Japanese language. Well, this kind of word immersing is used often, so that's why I used it in this video. I personally don't like it that much. But the gist or the idea behind this concept is that you start to surround yourself with Japanese. So for example, turn your phone into Japanese language, or watch the weather news in Japanese language. Maybe go to the official website of NHK, there you have many free reading resources by the way, and just read the news articles. Or maybe just take Todai, for example. It's an application, I will link it to, where you can also read some resources or some news in Japanese. It also has a dictionary included, and also the kanji and the vocabulary is sorted by JLPT level. And many people will tell you some things like you can start with sentence mining. I don't want to say that sentence mining is a bad thing or not a good thing. Basically the concept is that you look in the internet, for example in anime, and just take out the sentences and vocabulary and grammar from the anime and just put it in some kind of applications and then learn with it together. I personally would advise you to focus on books, because I think that in books grammar is usually used in a more, let's say, correct way. And in anime you often have slang words that are really just used for anime. For example, I had a friend that went to Japan with me together and he watched much anime, but that resulted in him using some kind of slangs or sayings that are not really used in everyday Japanese conversations. And if you look for certain books, for around N2 level, I would recommend Yoru no Picnic. I will put it down somewhere too. I mean, it costs money, but there are also some sites where you can in general read literature. I will also put it down in the sheet. And for example, why I would recommend this book or this type of book, there are some books that have like conversational Japanese. So for example, in the book, there's much conversation between persons, and I would recommend these kind of books where people like really have a conversation or talk, because I think from this you can learn correct Japanese and also learn conversational Japanese. Because the Japanese you learn in workbooks and the actual Japanese you use is also a bit different. But because you will use many free resources, I think you will not encounter that problem that much. But to just give you a kind of conclusion, I would advise you to immerse yourself. If it's by putting your phone on Japanese, reading the news in Japanese, just try to surround yourself with Japanese. because that's how you actually learn Japanese. And that will be similar for the N1 level. Here you need about 1000 to 2200 hours, and you should be above 2000 kanji. It will be about the amount that I told you for Joyo kanji before, about 2200 kanji. You should know more than 10,000 vocabulary, and there are additional grammar points that you need to study. Around about, I think, 200, 300. And here the same principles apply for what I told you with N2. In general, N1 is, in my opinion, not that important, because N1 has really much specific grammar, or much grammar and vocabulary that is used just in books, for example. So if you're someone focusing on conversational Japanese, I wouldn't advise you to learn for the JLPT N1. But if you want to learn for the JLPT N1 in general, I would advise you here again to use books and to really surround yourself with like written Japanese. Also, two more honorable mentions. In general, I would also recommend, it is called Satori Reader. It is also for literature, so in this case for N1 it can be pretty good. And what I forgot to say at the beginning level of N5, I would also advise you to take a look into the Mo way. I kind of found out about it because I got a comment about it, and I kind of skimmed through the resource, and I found out that the person there gives some pretty good advice on how to learn Japanese. I won't agree on everything what the person says, but in general I think there's some good things to get into the mindset of how to learn Japanese, or how to not learn Japanese. So now you know where to find the information on how to learn Japanese, and you got some tools to practice, but there are still two websites that I want to recommend you that I think will be crucial in your learning journey. So one of them is called Japanese Test for You. Basically it's a collection of tests for grammar or kanji or vocabulary, and I skipped through the website too, and there are really many tests. So there, if you learn something, you can kind of get a proof if what you learned or actually works. Also, what some people don't know, the actual JLPT institution, so the institution that does the official test, they also have some free workbooks. I will put them down in the sheet too. And this free workbook also includes like the exercises and test conditions. So before you take the test for the JLPT, I would advise you to take some of those test exams to kind of see how will the actual test look like. Like what questions will there be, or what kind of questions will there be, and what information should I focus on. For example, if you compare the German test to the Japanese test, you don't need to speak in the Japanese test. For example, in the German, if people want to learn German, they have to have some kind of conversational or communicational skills. For the JLPT, for example, you could be someone that doesn't know how to pronounce any word in Japanese. You can pass it and have a perfect score. And basically, if you just want to pass the JLPT test, you don't need to really focus on speaking. But at the end, Japanese is a language, and if your goal is to communicate in Japanese and not just to pass the test, I would highly advise you to also focus on speaking, or speaking exercises, pronunciation exercises. You can find some free resources in the internet too, and also on YouTube you can take a look. And a last honorable mention, and this guy saved my ass so many times, like really. You have to look up, when you're around N2 or N1 level, look up Deguchi Nichigo. And I never heard someone mention that person, but he's such a genius. So right now I'm doing my own Japanese courses too and creating my own website, but I could never have such clear explanations as this person. And basically, I will put him down in the sheet too. He explains every grammar from N5 to N1. The problem is that the grammar explanations from N5 to N3 are in Chinese, and I don't know Chinese, but from N2 to N1 he starts to explain you the grammar in Japanese. And he really, if you just watch the video from him, and they're just around about 5 minutes to 15 minutes, He has many examples and he really goes really clearly into the grammar and tells you in which situations you will use the grammar. So I think if you learn for N2 or N1, it is really a must to watch his videos. It will save you really much time, and also it is much more detailed than some grammar explanations from JLPT Sensei, for example. Also, because we just talked about the topic on focusing on different parts of a language, I will just keep it pretty short, but if you learn a language, I would really advise you to find out why you want to learn the language. For example, if you're a person that actually just wants to read Japanese media or books or watch anime, you maybe should focus more on kanji or more on certain grammar points than if you want to learn Japanese for conversation, for example. If, for example, you want to talk or make Japanese friends or maybe work in Japan, you should focus more on pronunciation. And for this purpose, I also made a free workbook. I will also link it down in the description. It is called Language Learning Motivation. And there you can find some tips on how to be motivated when learning Japanese, but also on how to find your motivation. In other words, how to find out why or for what purpose you want to learn Japanese. And I think this is a really crucial steps, because then you can find out how you should learn. And also this is a free resource, so it fits perfectly into this video. And a last honorable mention, and I think I will use the dictionary until the moment I die. And it is called Akebi. And Akebi is a dictionary like everything else, but the good thing is, first, the translations it has. It has really many translations inside, so you can get a good grasp of what a word means. And you can also link it with another app, and that is called Anki. To explain how to use Anki and so on would be a bit too much. If you want a more in-depth video about it, just write a comment. But in general, Anki, like I told you in the beginning, is a spaced repetition system. And basically you use it to create flashcards, like I told you. And by this, you will not forget it that easily. And creating flashcards on your own, maybe if you wrote them on paper one time, is really, really hard. And I can tell you, if I needed to do every flashcard, and let's just look at one level, you should know more than 10,000 vocabulary. Just imagine doing more than 10,000 flashcards. Like, I could never. And in general, for the Anki application, you have many decks in the internet, but I have to tell you that many of those decks have mistakes or wrong translations, and I wouldn't advise you to use decks from the internet. And if you use them, really be sure that they're corrected by many people and don't have mistakes inside. So that is where Akebi solves a really good problem. And Akebi solves the problem of creating those flashcards. Because there's a button and you can connect it with Anki, and it will input the vocabulary automatically. So for example, one thing that I was doing for some time is, when I talked with Japanese people on the phone, or when I talked with Japanese people here in Germany, when I didn't know a word, I looked it up in my dictionary sometimes and then put it inside Anki. And now I have an Anki deck of 3000 vocabulary for spoken Japanese situations. And you can use it for JLPT, you can use it for everyday conversations, you can use it for your favorite anime, and it's really, really easy to use. Just look up the word and press the button and it's inside your Anki deck. And also it has the pronunciation inside, it has an example sentence inside, and so on. So to just, let's say, summarize everything, to learn grammar, watch Deguchi Nichigo, use Akebi, Anki, find some applications that will be helpful for you. And if you want to be more efficient in your Japanese language learning journey, get my free workbook. And lately, when I read in the internet, and maybe if you also watch my video, you will come to the conclusion that you can basically learn everything for free. And on one side, this can be true, but on the other side, I have to tell you that it has some advantages, but on the other side, it has some disadvantages, as everything in life. And now I want to talk about you which advantages it has to use free resources and which disadvantages it has compared to some paid courses. So the first good thing, of course, is that it doesn't cost money. And if you don't have the money and if you cannot spend the money, then of course you don't have a different choice. But there's a reason behind that some courses cost money, and of course some courses will just scam you, but in general, if you buy a workbook, for example, let's say Mina no Nihongo. Mina no Nihongo is a workbook, as Genki or Tobira, I just take it for this example, that is done by many university professors that actually do daily teaching in Japanese language. And it is proofread by many professors. So in other words, if you pay the money, you know that the information written there is not wrong. And like I told you in the beginning, if you use free resources in the internet, everyone can write them. I can write them, you can write them, he can write them. And that is the problem, that people that maybe don't, that people that are not experienced in teaching, for example, or people that maybe didn't get their information double checked, they will not give you certain basic principles. And there we go to the second point. And a good thing, for example, is that I think free resources are really good because they're easy to use. The most paid resources are workbooks, for example, that you need to use and open and actually write something. But if you have a free application like Duolingo, that I would actually never use, but if you have a free application like Akebi, for example, or you use the websites, for example, you can learn them on the go too when you're in a train or in a car and so on. But on the other hand, like I told you before, it's not just that mistakes can be inside the free resource materials, but there's a lack of nuances. For example, if you take JLPT Sensei, it is a really good website to give you a good overview of many grammar points, but the problem with JLPT Sensei is that it doesn't have an in-depth explanation. So you learn the grammar, but you don't really understand the grammar. In this case, I found a YouTuber that can fix that problem. In this case, it is the one I told you before, Deguchi Nichigo. But for N5, N4, N3 level, I didn't really find resources that have in-depth explanations as some workbooks would have it. And the last good point that I pointed out for the resources is, like I told you before, is that they're digital. So you can use them on your phone, you can use them everywhere, you can use an application, you can use a website and so on. And there are many, many free resources that you can use. And in this case, it's just flexible. I would say it is better than the most paid products you can buy for Japanese learning. But here comes the last point that I want you to watch out for when you learn Japanese. And that is something that I witnessed myself. Because like I told you in the beginning, I learned Japanese at university and I had instructions by Japanese teachers 5 days a week for 3 years. And those were teachers that taught concepts about Japanese language since 30, 40, 50 years. And there I got some concepts or structures that are not really explained in the most free resources in the internet. Let me give you an example. For example, if I talk about the train structure of Japanese language to you, do you know what I mean? And I think in this situation, the most people don't know about the structure, even though it is the most basic structure in Japanese language. Or if I talk about you of the SOV structure, maybe this structure is more known, but still here many people don't know about the structure. And I think the problem with free resources is it is not like a workbook from the beginning to the end that teaches you basic concepts, and based on those concepts it will like increase the knowledge. Free resources are usually written about a certain topic. So you can imagine it like learning many islands of knowledge, but you don't really know where they're rooted in or where they're from or how they connect. And I think that is something that you need to watch out for. And honestly, I searched for it in the internet, but I didn't really find a solution for this. But to solve that problem, I actually created a course on my website, and it is there to give you the basic Japanese language structure. So there are many grammar explanations in the internet, vocabulary explanations. There's an explanation for everything in the internet. But where is that information rooted and where does that information start? For example, how are kanji vocabulary and grammar even connected? Most people just talk about them really separately, but they have a common connection. And that's where I created a workbook where I talk about the common connection those three things have, kanji, vocabulary and grammar, and about some really basic fundamental structures. Because I think if you have that knowledge, if you then use free resources to learn, then you're not that prone to mistakes because you can use that basic knowledge as a foundation to expand your Japanese proficiency. If you want, you can also take a link in the description. I think I will also put a picture of the workbook here in the video. And lastly, like I said before, I put every information I used in the video in some kind of spreadsheet or some kind of overview. You can just click the first link in the description or just scan the QR code here or there or there or there, I don't know. And then you will come to my website and I will send it to you. And as always, as in every video, thank you for listening. Have a great day. また今度よろしくね。